Thanks for coming to my channel. I'm Claire, and this is my video blog. I'm doing a series on the Brexit referendum, and today's edition I'm going to call Lies and Propaganda from Remainers. Because I went to a presentation or a question and answering session yesterday evening from a group called UK in a Changing Europe, and whilst they claimed that they had nothing to do with the EU and they were not a propaganda arm of it, as there are so many, nonetheless I'm not entirely convinced. But first, before I get into that, I just want to mention that along with the lies and propaganda of Remainers, there are also dirty tricks. I had made an old house for sale sign, which I'd repainted as an EU out, vote leave sign, which I had put at the front of my house, embedded the post in the garden, and it could be seen from the street by drivers going past and pedestrians. And yesterday evening my lovely sign was removed, completely vanished, not even tossed aside, but completely disappeared. Who knows, it's probably been taken away in a van or something. So there's some nice Remainer person out there who doesn't agree with freedom of speech. If I saw a Remainer sign, I might not be happy, or I might like to talk to the person who had the house. But unless it was posted out on completely common land, I would not consider it fair game at all. It was on my land, it was on my garden, my territory, and some Remainer person obviously took umbrage. So that's the kind of people they have amongst their camp. Anyway, back to the UK and a Changing Europe presentation I went to at the old Tetley house, at the old Tetley brewery, where most of it's now been knocked down and cleared away, sadly. Probably a result of some kind of EU policy that led to the old Tetley brewery, which had been there for well over a century, to anyway, it got sold off. I don't know the story behind that. It's a lovely building, but it's just a pity to see that the old brewery's been turned into no more than a pub and a place with a few meeting rooms. Anyway, there was about 30 or 40 of us, perhaps, maybe less, I don't know, 30 people perhaps, came to see this group, and I recognised some of them from off TV shows when I used to watch TV, so since that's been more than 5 years, they must have been on TV quite a lot of times. Certainly two of them. There's a chap called Angus, somebody, I think he's professor at London University. The names didn't quite match the website that I saw, because it had two women on the website and there was only one woman presenting, so amongst the other three men. So I don't quite know what all their names were, but anyway, I certainly recognised a couple of them from they being the kind of people, talking heads are always being relied upon by news programmes to provide expert opinion. And I was very interested that they seem to be expert on justifying and excusing the way that the EU works in economic terms. And they kept it all on economics as largely as they could, although I tried to take it away from that, and I managed to for a little while, although unfortunately Mr. Len Tingle, who is some kind of A-list BBC reporter or presenter, who I also remember from when I used to watch TV, so he's been around for a while, he was the presenter and master of ceremonies, and I didn't get on too well with Mr. Tingle, unfortunately. Well, there was a question which got onto migration, which obviously has become a major issue. And my view is that this is a global problem, and that the migrant issue, which has exploded over the last year, is something that's been handled so badly by the EU and is such a major threat that in itself is a good enough reason to get out of the EU, because decisions are being made centrally, or at least in certain quarters, that affect everybody without any form of consultation whatsoever, and they don't have any recourse to preventing the consequences of these floodgates which have been opened. So that in itself, in my view, is a good enough reason. But it was very interesting that they tried to pare it down to the failure of Cameron to reduce the numbers of non-EU migrants to tens of thousands, which of course is in the hundreds of thousands for that. And then they also said, well, of course, we only get so many, 300,000 from the EU, and these are all the skilled ones, and these are the skilled ones. Aren't the skilled ones we want? And all this, like, so it won't make any difference to the third world migrants coming here who get out of the EU. But they completely avoided the issue, which is obviously linked up totally with this third world migrant issue, the non-EU migrants. There doesn't seem to be any distinction between them, is this whole migrant issue. And I used the term migrant. I said the migrants that are coming into Europe. I think I might have used the term undocumented migrants to be quite clear about what I was referring to. And he said, oh, do you mean refugees? And I said, no, I mean migrants, because the EU Stats Office, I read a document on their website last year which indicated that it could be as many as 80% of the people coming in through the Mediterranean, primarily Greece and Italy, could not be confirmed to be from Syria at all. In fact, it's extremely unlikely and quite clear that many of them are obviously not from Syria. And an EU official has recently admitted at least 60%. So one might assume that it might be somewhere between those figures, in the region of 70-75% perhaps. This was something which Mr. Tingle, who was supposed to be an independent referee between the audience and the speakers, well, he wasn't, I didn't feel, because I felt he had his own agenda, which was really trying to shut me down, talking about the migrant issue outside of, oh, they're all refugees. I think we've seen not exactly a parallel example, but I think they're reconsidering this seriously in America after the Orlando event. Basically, you know, undocumented strangers from far away are really not, you know, a good bet for random trust. And so that was kind of interesting because, of course, I can't remember who it was, but there was somebody caused a bit of a furore on Andrew Neil's show a couple of weeks back when they mentioned that they considered the BBC to the principal, I think it was principal or primary propaganda arm of the EU. So I felt I very much saw that in action last night. So let's move on. Let's see. Well, so then I managed to try and move the debate onto sovereignty, which obviously there was a few more questions about economic issues, which I thought were kind of deliberately corralling the audience into a particular mindset, when I think there's a lot of people consider that the economic arguments are really, firstly, speculative, because nobody really knows what's going to happen entirely, but also largely wildly exaggerated, prophets of doom. That there might be, kind of brief interval of renegotiation of agreements, but we're a major economic power. All this threatening, it's just showing the threatening by Merkel and Junkers and all that lot who keep saying, oh, we might not treat you so nicely afterwards and everything. Well, of course, Germany is the only other of the countries in the EU which is of a similar size economy to us. So they're like, a good swimmer trying to hold on to another good swimmer as the Titanic is going down and say, well, look, save me. So anyway, we did get on to sovereignty, and they kept on. There was this expert there, one of these experts, who kept on claiming that sovereignty was not a problem, and they kept on saying, "Oh no, we can always opt out. We can opt out. We can disagree. We can veto. Blah 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 blah." And when I mentioned the Turkey situation, they said, back to Glenn Tingle. Yes, when I mentioned the Turkey situation and that I'd seen it in the Sunday Times. He flippantly remarked, "Oh, so that's absolutely true then, is it?" As if he thought that he, an A-list BBC reporter, had the position to dismiss a Sunday Times front page story just like that. Well, I dare say that he's probably heard of this story. I dare say you have. And the expert kept on saying, oh, well, no, it won't happen for at least 25 years, and they have to qualify for all these conditions, and, it'll be a very long time, and by the time... and I just found this ludicrously, completely incredible and utterly unconvincing, because I do believe there is some substance to all these leaks that have been coming out. I mean, I'd been hearing rumours about Turkey for weeks, if not months before, and all this stuff about visa-free travel and everything. And is it really likely that a country such as Turkey, with such a large population who live at such a lower economic level than most of those people in the European Union, most of whom are illiterate, all of whom speak as their first language something which is not a European language, they use a different script, and they have a different religion, which is, by the way, incidentally, got quite aggressive intentions upon Europe. And we're being told that when they do finally qualify, because of course it is inevitable, that it'll all be sorted out and they'll have risen to our standards, and I frankly don't believe it. It was just incredible. After you listen to the kind of things that you've been hearing Erdogan say in recent times, and the kind of cucked way in which Merkel and the EU leaders have kind of, been not really, facing this guy. He's a third world bully, just with a large population, and he just happens to be a member of NATO because it's convenient for us, for NATO at least. He's kind of throwing his weight around, really, and all this stuff. It's quite obvious. I've seen those quotes. I've heard Cameron saying that he wants to, fast track Turkey. So, and this whole idea that our sovereignty will be retained, and that we will be able to exercise our borders and stop, 1 million people from Turkey coming here, when we can't even stop 150 probably Africans walking through the Channel Tunnel every day, which is reported by a member of the Kent, I believe it is, fire service, who is involved with the safety patrols on the in the Channel Tunnel, and you can catch an interview about that on Red Ice Radio, which would be probably last autumn sometime. So anyway, I see the time is come up. I've already talked for 15 minutes, and there's so much more I could say. But this thing about sovereignty, I mean, I'll just wrap up about this, because there was no mention of anything to do with the Irish referendum. I mean, when you get to these talks, there's so much detail to get into, and they always try and steer you away from the difficult topics. We never got on to the mentioning of the Irish referendum and how that was forced again only 18 months after it rejected the treaty and conditions, and that's exactly what they will do to us. All this stuff, I simply didn't believe. It was just a charade. It was just a PR stunt, and these people there, they may well even believe their own propaganda, because they themselves are part of this whole system which only sees things in this very narrow, limited terms of their own, economic terms, their own considerations of what is important, and they seem to be literally just either unaware or blithely dismissing, like naive cuckolds, what is going on the southern borders of Europe. And frankly, I'm glad I went to see what was going on with these people, and to challenge that nice Mr. Tingle, because he was a really an object example to me of the kind of mindset controllers that are in residence at the BBC and do their best to make sure we all think the right things. But I think a big part of what we're going on at the moment about is obviously deconstructing what they're doing, demonstrating and exposing the lies and the propaganda that we've been fed from the Remainers. So I'll leave us there. I hope you vote leave. Vote leave, vote leave. We have to vote leave to leave the corrupt, tyrannical European Union, which will destroy us all, take us down like the Titanic if we don't get out. So vote leave, and thank you for watching my channel. Thank you. Some nice Remainer person out there who doesn't agree with freedom of speech. If I saw a Remainer sign, I might not be happy, or I might like to talk to the person who had the house. But unless it was posted out on completely common land, I would not consider it fair game at all. It was on my as an EU out vote leave sign, which I had put at the front of my house, embedded the post in the garden, and it could be seen from the street by drivers going past and pedestrians. And yesterday evening, my lovely sign was removed, completely vanished, not even tossed aside, but completely disappeared. Who knows, it's probably been taken away in a van or something. So there's some land is on my garden, my territory, and some Remainer person obviously took umbrage. So that's the kind of people they have amongst their camp. Anyway, back to the UK and a Changing Europe presentation I went to at the old Tetley house, at the old Tetley brewery, where most of it's now been knocked down and cleared away, sadly. Probably a result. Hello, thanks for coming to my channel. I'm Claire, and this is my video blog. I'm doing a series on the Brexit referendum, and today's edition I'm going to call Lies and Propaganda from Remainers. Because I went to a presentation or a question and answering session yesterday evening from a group called UK in a Changing Europe, And whilst they claimed that they had nothing to do with the EU and they were not a propaganda arm of it, as there are so many, nonetheless, I'm not entirely convinced. But first, before I get into that, I just want to mention that along with the lies and propaganda of Remainers, there are also dirty tricks. I had made an old house for sale sign, which I'd repainted